I hadn't been on the farm for very long when strange things started to happen. What should have been an easy routine, inheriting the place that my grandparents left me in Texas, right on the border with Mexico, was constantly made more difficult by, well, every problem that could have possibly started up. The house roof leaked. That was to be expected. It was an old house. My grandfather had passed away 3 years ago, and my grandmother hadn't been keeping up on anything but the animals after that. Then it sat empty for another 3 months. So the roof leaked, the stairs creaked, and the window that looked out towards the barnyard was nailed shut. I figured that was just because they were older and got confused sometimes at night. That happened with people sometimes, where the sun going down made them act weird. Sundowners, I thought. So I took the nails out of the window and got to work. At least with the windows pushed open, it helped clear out the dusty odor that seemed to cling to the building. The problem was, the general lack of maintenance wasn't the only thing going on. It was a pretty 2-story farmhouse. The problems that had been caused by my grandparents' age could have easily been fixed. It was just that, sometimes, things wouldn't be where I'd left them the next morning. Tools that were knocked off at the counter, things that had been left on my dresser were now on the ground. Dirt all over the house, even in places like on top of the fridge, where no dirt should have been. I tried to ignore it, but it was unsettling. And there was this feeling, too, like I was always being watched, no matter where I went or what I did. It was especially bad at night. The moment that the sun went down, a strange feeling would creep over me. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder and craning my head to the side, trying to catch a sound on the wind. It felt as though there was someone else on the farm. It was a stupid thought, of course. No one else was anywhere near the property. Not for miles in either direction. This farm was totally secluded. My grandparents didn't have any friends. I hadn't yet given the address out to my own friends. No one should have been out there. Still, all of that could have been dismissed as the isolation getting to me. That sort of thing happened when you're out on your own, right? Every bump in the night transformed from a rat into a monster waiting underneath of the bed, ready to gobble you up. Then, the animals started dying. That was a lot more difficult to brush aside and write off. It wasn't just because I didn't know what I was doing either. My grandparents had been running a goat farm for years, and they were the owners of a healthy herd of goats. When they died, I was given not only the goats, but very careful instructions on how to take care of them, including making sure that they were locked up overnight. I figured that was to keep them safe from coyotes. Boy, was I wrong. Anyway, every now and then, the goats would either manage to break out. Remember when I mentioned that my grandfather hadn't been taking care of maintenance? Yeah, that extended to the goat pen too, which was in desperate need of a total makeover. Or I would miss one of the goats at night during the twilight roundup. It would end up dead the next morning. I was upset the first time it happened. Heartbroken even. I could barely look at it while I buried it. The poor thing must have been so scared, stuck outside in the dead of night, no one around, unable to get back into its pen. I vowed to do better. And for several weeks, I did. But everyone forgets once in a while. And soon enough, another goat managed to get stuck outside of the pen overnight. I was upset the second time too, but I was able to get a better look at the animal. It hadn't been ripped open the way that a coyote might have done. There were no places where massive fangs or claws had ripped open the flesh. It had been totally drained of blood through a single slit in the neck. What could have done something like that? I was starting to get nervous. The third goat met the same fate, and at that point, The things in the house being knocked around felt almost like a nightly occurrence. There was something getting into the farmhouse, and there was something hurting the goats. I decided that I would figure out what it was and make sure that it never came back. I mean, it had to be the same thing, right? The chances that I was being bothered by two separate entities seemed pretty slim. I started with the goats, setting up in a lawn chair by the goat pen, with a rifle flung over one shoulder. Hunting wasn't something that I really enjoyed, but I liked burying dead, bloodless goats even less. A single goat had been left outside on purpose, though I vowed to protect it. I stayed out of sight and watched the pen. Watched it right up until I fell asleep. Some hours later, around midnight, I was woken up by the sound of my bait goat screaming. It was being attacked. I jumped to my feet, grabbing and aiming my gun, only to freeze. It was no coyote that had the goat, but a small creature about the size of a pit bull, with skinny fox legs and a narrow, flattened face. There was no hair on it, and each hand had opposable fingers on it, like bats or apes. The creature had fully wrapped itself around the goat, which lay on its side bleeding pathetically. A long, prehensile tongue slid out of its mouth. The tip of the tongue was sharp, and it slit a little notch into the goat's neck, and then slid inside, pressing up under the skin. I could only watch in horror as this creature drank the blood of the goat. It must have been El Chupacabra. What else could it be? No animal truly looked like that. I had been raised hearing about this creature from my grandparents, but had never once believed that it might have been real. Now, the proof of its existence was right in front of me, feeding from one of my goats. Snapping out of my stupor, I aimed the gun and fired. The sound split through the air. It was too late to save that goat, but I had high hopes of killing this beast and saving the rest of the flock. The bullet lodged into the Chupacabra's shoulder. It screamed out at the top of its lungs and flung itself away from the goat. I gave chase. The Chupacabra raced up at the side of the farmhouse, scaling the wood as though it was running over flat ground. At the top, it used one strange hand to slide open the window and crawl inside. That's what had been running around in my house. It struck me that I was lucky the creature had been eating the goats and not going for my neck as I slept. Fear surging through me, I ran through the front door. The creature was perched on top of the fridge, prodding at its bloody shoulder as though trying to figure out the wound. I aimed and shot at it again, missing the first time and catching it in the side on the second. The creature jerked about like bacon in a hot frying pan. It fell off of the fridge, and then, snarling, flung itself forward and barreled into me, knocking me down. My head cracked painfully against the hardwood floor, the rest of my body following suit. The Chupacabra used me as a springboard, launching over the top of me and out the front door, which I had left open. By the time that I got my feet back under me, I was left with a dead goat and a splitting headache. El Chupacabra was nowhere to be seen. The very next day, I went back upstairs and I nailed the window closed again. I made a bigger effort to keep the goats in overnight too, no matter what was going on or how many of them were straggling behind the rest of the herd. Maybe it wouldn't have mattered. Shooting the monster seemed to have scared it off pretty good. I never saw it again, at least. Though I also never left the window sitting open in invitation.
Subscribe today, or beware.